Marcus Hale had flown millions of miles in his life, but nothing prepared him for the moment of routine. First-class boarding spiraled into a public storm that would shake the entire aviation industry. It began quietly, almost forgettably, with the soft rustle of passengers settling into their seats and the low hum of engines outside. The window until a flight attendant approached him with sharp suspicion in her voice demanding identification, as though he were an intruder rather than a paying customer. Passengers lifted their heads, sensing an abnormal tension in her tone. But Marcus stayed composed, offering his ID with a calmness that only irritated her further. When she examined his ticket and muttered that people like you often try to sneak into premium cabins, the temperature of the cabin shifted. A chill settled over the front rows as a few passengers exchanged glances, and one quietly tapped his screen to start recording. Marcus simply lifted his eyes from the page he'd been reading, stared at her with patient steadiness, and asked her to clarify what she meant. But instead of backing down, she doubled her accusation, insisting his presence didn't match the first-class environment. Her words weren't loud, but they were sharp enough to cut the room in half. When Marcus calmly requested the captain to verify the situation, she panicked and radioed for security. Framing him as uncooperative, unaware that multiple phones were already recording her tone and language. The captain arrived expecting a belligerent passenger, but instead found a dignified man sitting quietly with his hands folded. Marcus offered multiple forms of ID, never raising his voice, pointing out politely that he had purchased the ticket directly from the airline. Passengers began speaking up, some confused, others angry, while a live stream quietly started gaining viewers. When security entered, expecting a threat, they found none. Marcus didn't move, didn't argue, simply handed them a single business card from his briefcase, a matte black card with a logo that froze every officer in place. Marcus Hale, Chairman Apex Air Group, the parent company of the very airline they were flying on. The attendant went ghostly pale. The captain stepped back as if he'd been burned. The murmurs in the cabin turned into a wave of shock as people realized they had witnessed not a customer dispute but the profiling of the most powerful figure in the airline itself. Marcus didn't boast, didn't flash authority, didn't revel in their fear. He simply said, with devastating calm, "Now we resolve this properly." The live stream exploded online, climbing from hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands of viewers, news outlets picking it up within minutes, hashtags forming, commentary flooding in. Executives at headquarters called the flight deck demanding details. Lawyers scrambled in the background. The captain, now visibly shaken, tried to reassure Marcus, but the damage had already gone beyond the cabin walls. The regional director sprinted down the jet bridge, breathless, attempting corporate apologies. But Marcus ignored them, staring straight ahead with the certainty of a man who had been preparing for this moment his entire life. "This isn't about a seat," he said softly, but everyone heard him. "This is about a system that decides who belongs before it checks the facts." The plane was ordered to remain at the gate. Departure was frozen. The airline's crisis team was activated. Share prices dipped in real time, and when Marcus finally stood up, slow, precise, unbothered, the entire front cabin fell silent, realizing they were no longer part of a simple confrontation, but the opening chapter of an industry-wide reckoning he had just set in motion. And yet everything that happened on the plane was nothing compared to the explosion waiting for them once. Marcus Made, the regional director, arrived at the gate with the frantic energy of a man trying to stop a train that had already left the station. But even before he reached Marcus, he could see from the frozen faces of passengers and the glowing phone screens that this situation had grown far beyond company control. Attempting to maintain some shred of authority, he introduced himself with a trembling apology, offering upgrades, refunds, complimentary lounges, anything that sounded like damage control. But Marcus didn't even shift his gaze in his direction. Instead, he calmly folded his hands and said, "This isn't an inconvenience you can compensate. This is a pattern you can no longer ignore." Those words rippled through the surrounding crowd, and the director realized he wasn't facing an angry customer. He was standing in front of the man whose signature authorized half the airline's major operational decisions. The disaster elevated itself when Marcus's phone vibrated, and he answered without stepping away. Letting everyone see the caller ID, Apex Air Emergency Response Division, the command center that usually only contacted the board during major crises. The voice on the other end belonged to a federal compliance liaison. She spoke clearly enough for nearby cameras to capture her instructions. "Mr. Hale, stay seated." Federal regulators are already monitoring this case. Do not allow security to relocate you. The plane, the cabin, the entire corridor fell into stunned silence. The director's eyes widened as he realized this was indeed just a PR nightmare. This was now a federal event. Marcus hung up the call slowly and addressed the crew with a calmness that cut deeper than anger ever could. You didn't profile a chairman today? You profiled the passenger you assumed I was? One by one, security officers confirmed he hadn't been aggressive. Passengers stepped forward to verify everything they heard. A live stream that began with a sleepy college student had now crossed 200,000 viewers. News outlets, reporters, activists, and aviation watchdog groups were flooding social media. The captain received a direct instruction from corporate to abort departure entirely. The plane was officially grounded not due to weather, not due to mechanical faults, but because one man refused to be quietly disrespected. Then federal agents arrived at the gate, not to escort Marcus off, but to question the crew about their decision-making process. Each attendant, supervisor, and staff member was separated and interviewed. Their answers compared against video footage the passengers had recorded. When asked about what feeling made the attendant doubt Marcus's ticket, she stuttered, stumbled, then broke down entirely. Meanwhile, Marcus remained seated, calm, unshaken, watching the system unravel. A senior DOJ civil rights investigator boarded the aircraft next and addressed Marcus respectfully, asking whether this was an isolated event for him. Marcus responded with the kind of quiet precision that made every camera lean closer. It's happened 47 times. I counted. The cabin reacted as though the temperature had suddenly dropped. Passengers exchanged horrified glances. Even those who had never experienced such profiling felt the weight of his statement. Then the investigator asked whether he had documented those incidents. Marcus tapped his briefcase and replied, time-stamped. Every one of them. Today was simply the day you all finally saw it happen. That single sentence reframed everything, not an isolated moment, but a symptom of a broken industry. Minutes later, the DOJ announced an official civil rights inquiry into discriminatory premium cabin practices across all major airlines. Apex Air wasn't the only company under scrutiny anymore. The entire aviation sector was suddenly being forced to confront a truth it had quietly buried for years. Marcus stepped out onto the concourse to a wall of reporters and flashing cameras. He didn't raise his voice or attack anyone personally. Instead, he delivered a measured, devastating statement. I'm not here to destroy employees. I'm here to expose a culture. Why is it a system that determines who belongs? Not by evidence, but by prejudice. Today marks the start of a reform the industry can no longer delay. Within hours, Apex Air announced sweeping changes, mandatory anti-bias training for all staff. Third-party oversight committees recorded accountability for every removal, transparent reporting, crew body cameras, and a compensation program for past victims. Other airlines scrambled to issue their own statements, terrified of being next in line. And as Marcus left the airport, surrounded by federal officials and reporters desperate for quotes, someone shouted, "Mr. Hale, what happens next?" Marcus paused, turned his head slightly, and answered with chilling calm, "Next. We take this beyond airlines. Because what happened here doesn't start in airport sand. It doesn't end here either. A single phone call powerful enough to shake every airline in the country.